Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based on the west side of Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictive compulsive behaviors. Welcome to my podcast, named after my recent book and workbook, It's Not About the Sex. Here we have direct and honest conversations related to compulsive sexual behavior and trauma, all from a sexual health perspective. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints and practical strategies toward establishing greater intimacy and a more deeply connected life. Let's begin.
Chapter 6, Feeling the Feelings. I was born with a lot of feelings. As the baby of the family, I lived up to the stereotype of my birth order and was seen as a crybaby at times. Sometimes I knew what I was crying about, and at other times I did not. All I knew was that my feelings felt like too much for my parents, and I felt like too much for them to handle. In my childhood home, there were either big feelings or no feelings at all. Rage seemed to be the norm, but eventually I took on the role of mediator, leaving me without access to my wants and desires. None of us were fluent in expressing feelings in a safe and productive way. I learned that it was best to keep my feelings to myself. I thought this would be a wise strategy until my feelings built up pressure and I learned how to self-soothe through masturbation and eventually through various types of sexual exploration. My guess is that there was a lot of self-soothing going on in my home because we were not equipped to soothe one another. Feelings seem to go underground and leak out in unexpected ways. Because my parents stayed in a loveless marriage for many years beyond its expiration date, an atmosphere of tension and discontent filled the air. Luckily, a lifetime of therapy and 12-step programs have helped me thaw from the days when it wasn't safe enough to express myself fully.
Thanks, Andrew. Why did you decide to include this particular chapter in your workbook?
This chapter is really important to me because I believe that in recovery, something that's really, really important, as we've talked about before, is regulating our nervous system. And one way to regulate our nervous system or think about regulating our nervous system is about being fully ourselves, being comfortable in our own skin, and expressing ourselves fully, right? So this is essential. And part of all of that, not everything, but part of that is being able to identify and name and metabolize our feelings, which helps us find that resilience, that regulated zone. And that's why I feel this is just so important to talk about today.
So it seems so simple, almost like elementary, but some people sometimes have trouble naming their feelings. And many of us weren't really like raised or modeled a feelings language at home.
I almost think this is generational, and I don't think this goes across the board, but I think when we were growing up, back in the 70s and 80s, parents just didn't really talk much about feelings. Like a feelings language wasn't something we learned in school. It wasn't something that we learned at home. It was one of those things that was maybe part of what we understood, but it wasn't really something that we were exposed to. And so it might sound really simple, but a lot of people don't even know when they're having a feeling or how to name that feeling, right? Just accessing what's going on inside can be really, really difficult. And in my practice, I really talk a lot about what I call the primary feelings. Many people were taught, at least in my therapeutic world, about the 4 primary feelings, which are mad, sad, glad, and afraid.
Hmm.
But I add a couple other feelings that I think are important, which is hurt, guilt and shame, love, and hate, actually, which a lot of people don't want to talk about, but I think really needs to be expressed, especially when it's building pressure inside.
Yeah. I write these on the board a lot in my groups too, because people don't know how to identify feelings. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people cover them up and just don't even know that it's even okay to feel these things. So, why do you think this is so helpful in relationships?
I always think about group therapy because that's where my brain takes me many times because I'm in the group therapy room with my groups a majority of my practice right now. And what happens is when somebody talks from their cerebral uh, part of who they are, right? When somebody talks from their thinking brain, so to speak, we can get to know them, but generally it's limited, right? It's helpful to know what people are thinking. But when somebody is able to say something like, when you said that, I felt hurt, or when you were talking about your childhood trauma, I was feeling so sad. There's a different resonance when the feelings language is being utilized. And I believe that when we're able to name and share what feelings are really going on inside of us, that it gives other people permission to do that too. It's really that zone of vulnerability, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there's deeper contact. What I see it time and time again in my groups is that when someone is talking from that deeper emotional place, right? We were just talking about this on another episode with Katie Griffin, the idea of progressive emotional communication. And what that means really is, can we share whatever that deeper emotion is, and is, can it reach the other person in a way that has a a particular kind of contact or deeper contact that doesn't happen otherwise.
I'm wondering if you can share something without realizing it's something you have, like being aware of it. So, do you think that awareness has to come first?
You know, a lot of this is trial and error. If somebody comes to me in my practice and is having difficulty accessing what's going on inside of them, of course, I don't want to shame them for that. I want to be curious. I want to be non judgmental. But I open the net a little bit further and I say to them, okay, maybe you can't identify a feeling, but are there any thoughts or maybe something, a physical sensation in your body or a memory or an image of some type? Because that allows for a greater dimensional um, deepening of what is really going on inside of me. Some people are so numb or shut down or depressed or whatever that they don't have access to any of that. But the idea is, can they over time start to notice and be curious themselves about what's really happening internally?
Mm, yeah, gives them the opportunity to kind of reflect and go deeper.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You have a very interesting way of describing anger. Can you say more about that?
Absolutely. I talk about this in my workbook because I have strong feelings about it. Anger gets a bad rap. Anger is often seen as something that's destructive or self destructive. And most of the time, when we're talking about something destructive or self destructive, we're not talking about anger, we're talking about rage. And so I put rage in a separate category. So I'm not going to be talking about rage right now. But anger, in its simplest form, is being able to say to yourself, I like this or I don't like this. I, I, I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with that. This is something that I want more of or less of. It's really starting to ask oneself, what is it that something brings up for them, usually in relationship is what I'm talking to, but really anything. Like if somebody cuts you off in traffic, um, hopefully you're not going to go into a road rage, but you can say to yourself, and I do this out loud sometimes, I don't like that. That's not okay. And I don't have to raise my voice too much, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm acknowledging that there's something that happens around me that doesn't feel good, right? And once we're able to identify that, that's when we can set what I would consider healthier boundaries, right? We can't have boundaries unless we're in touch with our anger, right? So I'll give a quick example. There was, someone in my life who was the relationship just didn't work out. I'll just leave it at that. And I was hurt, but I was also angry. And eventually I had to say to myself, that behavior that was going on is not okay with me, right? I don't like that. And again, those simple ways of expressing oneself are expressions of anger. And knowing in that case that I had to either limit the relationship, right, and really minimize contact or in contact. And so that's where anger is so productive. And if we can make our anger safe enough and productive enough, we're absolutely on the right track. I also just want to add that I really see anger as part of our life energy, our
Yeah,
life force,
for sure. It's helpful. It can be helpful, right?
for
It can help
sure.
you. It's one of the most in your face ones, I guess, that you can get in touch with easier than maybe some of the other ones to really identify because it can be kind of flailing, I guess, at times. So you can use it in a way to help you understand and set boundaries.
Definitely. And depending on our backgrounds, and this is my own experience, is that I was taught to be conflict avoidant from a very, very young age. There's a lot of conflict around me, but I avoided it. And so I really had to learn over the years how to feel more equipped, how to have more capacity to stay present, literally to be present with conflict and with anger so that I didn't just disappear and dissociate or something like that.
Right.
And, the other thing that you reminded me of, Sue, is that this is such a taboo subject for a lot of people. But in my groups, what actually happens is when people can openly and honestly express their anger in a safe enough, productive enough way, they generally feel much more intimate with the person that they've had the exchange with. It may not be easy
Mhm.
to be so open and honest, but eventually there's a deeper respect, a deeper trust, and an ability to really be oneself in the group and with that other person.
Because you're getting a really good glimpse as to their emotions.
Exactly. That's right.
So, this is a related question about hurt. And you refer to this also in the workbook as the designer emotion. So, how do you describe hurt?
Hurt is fascinating to me because I've learned through my own therapy and mentors that hurt is so valuable in terms of learning about ourselves that I used to, especially as a kid, go into victim mode. It would always feel like something was being done to me or I was at the mercy of something. And sometimes I was as a kid, but once I became an adult, that doesn't work so well. And so what I've learned is that the reason I call it a designer emotion is that if hurt is the hub of the wheel, there is anger and shame and sadness and disappointment and disillusionment that goes along with it, like the spokes of hurt. And the biggest question is how am I creating this feeling of hurt inside of myself. In other words, how am I able to take full responsibility for all of my feelings, but in this case, hurt, and all of my reactions related to hurt. And in the workbook, I do go into a method of doing just that and moving through it. But I just want to say that hurt is a fantastic teacher. And if we can come from a place of radical acceptance, both of ourselves and of others, it can truly be a fertile ground to really, really learn about ourselves and to feel a sense of agency around moving through the hurt and not perpetuating old patterns.
You also describe fear and loneliness as opportunities to learn about yourself. Can you say more about that? They all seem like they're opportunities to learn about ourselves, right?
Pretty much every feeling that we feel is an opportunity to learn about ourselves. The way I look at this, and by the way, we're just touching on a few of the feelings today in our conversation. Oftentimes, and this is my story, so I'll go from here, oftentimes staying still long enough to feel the feelings is the foundation. That's the very beginning. And I've always been a practicer, if that's a word. I've always practiced busyness and list making and perfectionism. These are all ways of protecting myself. I don't have shame around that anymore, but I realized that I had trouble slowing down and really being still long enough to truly feel the feelings, right? So we all have lots and lots of ways to avoid our feelings, to stuff our feelings, to sometimes milk our feelings, right? And go in lots of different directions. But hopefully through the workbook and through the steps and through therapy, especially group therapy, I've learned, and you can learn what you didn't learn as a kid, right? That's really what I'm trying to get out there, is that idea that it's never too late to learn. And sometimes we have to play catch up because we just didn't have the role models to help us access and understand what our feelings were really telling us. And so as a result, when we feel our feelings, more satisfying relationships are truly possible.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And I feel like it's a part of like evolving, right? Becoming closer to yourself and understanding your responses and reactions to different things as they pop up in this life.
Yeah, it's part of life, and it's part of recovery, and it's part of being human.
You're right about not learning about it as a child. Back when we were kids, it's more common now. I know, like when I was
Yes.
teaching, that we did have a curriculum in place,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's more that are being developed now around addiction and as like a future outcome for children who don't know how to express their feelings.
Wow.
And so this is a whole new thing that's being talked about in the elementary school levels that I'm privy to right now, and it's a very interesting topic for sure. So this is definitely worth looking into.
I love that. I mean, that's so inspiring. I was thinking of your kids. They certainly got more feelings language than we did growing up.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's just more awareness around teaching this and helping kids get more exposure to what this truly means.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. So as we wind down our episode today, I just wanted you and I to go over the last section of the chapter, which I call Your Practice. And so would you be willing to start off with number 1?
Feelings are like clouds. They seem like they are stalling at times, but eventually they move through and disperse. Remind yourself that an individual feeling is not here to stay. It's just here to teach you about yourself.
Number 2, Unexpressed feelings tend to be dangerous if not processed. Unprocessed feelings or unexpressed feelings may lead to sexualizing your feelings. Do whatever it takes to process them more efficiently.
Number 3, anger gets a bad rap. It's an indication that something feels unacceptable or not okay with you. When you identify anger and ground yourself, this is the time to set a boundary that works better for you.
Number 4, conflict avoidance generally comes from fear. Identify your fear and try to understand the conflict that exists within you.
Anger creates connection. Find the people in your life who are truly available to listen and validate your anger. Anger can be a bid for contact.
And number 6, hurt is a multidimensional feeling, which may involve anger, sadness, fear, resentment, and disillusionment. Embrace hurt as one of your greatest teachers and work toward keeping your side of the street clean. Thanks for listening today. It was so great sharing the time with my colleague and friend, Sue Merlino, and discussing this really vital topic. If you're so inclined, please give us a 5-star rating and be sure to subscribe and share my podcast with those who may benefit. I look forward to you joining us the next time, and don't forget to stay connected.